Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and it is high time, way past high time, that we had P.L. Stuart onto the podcast to talk about his book, A Drowned Kingdom. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you, Lily and Sarah. I'm so honored to be here.
I'm so excited to talk about your book with you. But first, what is something great that happened recently?
Something great that happened recently. Well, I live in Canada, and I know a lot of people exaggerate about Canadian weather, but sometimes it gets pretty bad in the winter. And I live in Barrie, kind of like the snow belt, about an hour north of Toronto. And I actually had pretty good commutes. I only had 1 2-hour drive to work this week. So I alternate working from home with days driving to the office. And the office is nominally about an hour drive. They're in good weather, good traffic, but sometimes it's not. But I only had one bad drive this week where I expected to have 2 or 3 because of the weather. So I know a small victory, but I'm happy about it.
Hey, that counts.
Yeah, I'm happy about it. So that went well this week.
Oh man, I'm such a wimp. I'm also hybrid in my work life. And if it snows in Seattle, I'm like, that's a work from home day for me. It's rarer here, so I can play that game.
Well, that's awesome. I'm happy for you. I'm not a hater. I'm happy for you.
I'm just sitting here amazed that you will go to work when you have a 2-hour commute, because I work from home, and I'm like, nope, I'm not going to do that.
No, I'm grateful now. I used to work shift work. I don't do that anymore. I work, Monday, Friday, 9 to 5 now. I have weekends off, I have holidays. I can plan my life. I can go to my wife and say, hey, honey, what are we doing this weekend? Like that wasn't a thing for a long time. So I'm grateful.
Oh, that is good. Sarah, how have you been doing? What's something great that's happened for you?
My good thing is that sometime between the end of December and the beginning of January, I don't remember when exactly, I ordered some yarn from a yarn dyer in Ireland, and my package arrived today. So it took a while, but it finally got here, and I'm very pleased.
Is that the one you've been texting me about all day, waiting for it to arrive?
Yes, that is that one.
Do you know what you're going to make with it?
No.
All right.
When I bought the yarn, I had some idea, and now I have no idea. So
it'll be a surprise. My good thing is that earlier this week, I went to go see a musical called Quixote Nuevo. It was very good. The local Seattle Repertory Theater up here put it on, I guess in conjunction with the Portland and South Coast rep. Anyway, it's like a retelling of Don Quixote, but like a retired literature professor who's getting senile thinks he is Don Quixote because he used to teach the book. And so he's like recreating the story running around his like border town in Texas. And anyway, it was very good, very sad, but amazing show.
So like he literally like goes charging at windmills and stuff and the whole nine?
It was an immigration drone, border patrol drone that he goes charging at.
Yeah. I gotta check that out.
Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, and like I said, very sad. It dealt with a lot of like border stuff on the Texas-Mexico border, so it's sad by default.
I get it.
That was a downer. That's not what I meant to do. Anyway, moving on. What's everyone drinking tonight?
I've got some red wine. I think Othrin. Is Othrin how you pronounce it? Othrin? I feel like...
Yeah, Othrin?
Yeah. I feel like he comments a couple of times that he is sad that he's not able to drink wine in the book. So I'm drinking it for him.
Oh, I'm honored. Thank you. Yeah, he's definitely a wine snob.
Yeah, a little bit.
He's a snob in a lot of other ways, obviously, but he's a wine snob for sure. So you're drinking red?
I'm drinking red wine, yeah.
Merlot, Shiraz.
It's whatever the bottle said it was.
What the bottle says. Don't need to know what it is. Just it's red wine. It's good. All red wine is good. So
yeah,
basically.
I agree. Totally concur.
Well, it has been for me bad weather this week, although that's relative a little bit. But at some point in time when it's been storming for too many days in a row, I just need to drink mint tea in bed. So that's where I'm at. I have my hot mug of mint tea and I'm staying warm.
Right now, I'm just actually drinking, believe it or not, it's just mango juice. I was on a podcast earlier. I just need to keep my whistle wet. But later on, I'll probably move on to some rum after this podcast is done, just before bed. Just a little nightcap. Probably some Mount Gay rum, which is the oldest rum in the world. It's Bajan rum. My background, my mother is from Barbados, and Mount Gay is smooth and it's awesome. So
I'll have to check it out. I love rum. Do you drink it straight or with ice?
normally neat. Sometimes, depending, if I'm on vacation, I tend to mix it because you want to stretch that out a bit longer because I couldn't keep drinking it straight, all night long, or else I'd be in a state. But yeah.
I was going to say that mango juice and rum sounds like a pretty good combination, actually.
It is. It is. Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, when you try to stretch it out because you put the juice in and then you don't feel the effects right away, you fool yourself. Oh, it's just fruity and juicy, and then eventually, it gets to you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Has anyone read anything good lately that we're not already discussing tonight? I haven't.
Yeah, I have not done a lot of reading lately because we've had a lot of podcasting. I'm hopefully planning this weekend on reading A Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas because there's a new Sarah J. Maas book coming out in a couple of days in that series, and I have friends who are like super, super, super into it. And so I want to catch up to them so that we can all be excited together, or so that they can be excited and I can read all of their spoiler tags because I like to read the spoiler tags in Discord, but I haven't actually started that yet. So that's not really a good answer.
I'll allow it. How about you?
I just finished reading book 4 of Malazan. I pronounce it Malazan, however you pronounce it, by Stephen Erickson. It's a brilliant series. It's one of those series where you just have to go into and go, I don't understand what's going on, but that's okay. And just keep reading. And then you will understand some things, but some things don't feel that you're not intelligent. You don't have the intellect to figure it out. It's just you're kind of thrown in the deep end and left to figure things out. It's interesting that way because, especially as a writer, because you feel like, well, I should be able to figure that out because, I'm a writer and, I write complex plots and I should be able to figure that. But anyways, it's a great series. And so I just finished it up and now I'm reading a couple of things. I always have a couple of things to go. I have an arc from H.L. Tinsley, awesome writer friend of mine who wrote We Men Unmasked in Shadow and that series and the Vanguard series. She's phenomenal. I was privileged to read her arc called The Hallows, and I'm also reading another good writer friend of mine, the awesome Miles / Christian Cameron. I'm reading the last book of his Masters and Mages trilogy, Bright Steel. So that's what I kind of have on the go right now.
Nice. You are carrying that question for us since neither of us had good answers.
Well, a book I have read recently was A Drowned Kingdom. I just noticed your hat, by the way. I love it. That's wonderful. For listeners, the symbol of the main religion from the book. And you have a shirt too? That's so cool.
Yeah, I gotta represent, Lily. Gotta support the swag. Yeah.
I always appreciate an author who has merch for their book. Like, I think it's fantastic.
It was the thing we want to, my wife, who's my business manager, the real brains behind the entrepreneurial thing. Hey, Deb, love you, sweetheart. She might watch it later. Well, sorry, listen to it later. Who knows? So, but yeah, so we initially wound up giving most away just to friends and family or when we went to shows or cons or fairs. But of course, you got to keep some good stuff for yourself. So, so I like wearing it and I tend to wear it whenever I go to things like this. So
Awesome. Oh, I love it. Okay, so one of the things I noticed reading this book is that it takes, I would say, about halfway through the novel before we're really introduced to the magic system of this world. And I realized this before we got there, obviously. I think I was like a quarter of the way in, and I went, there's no magic in this book. But it 100% feels like a fantasy novel. And then you threw me into a tailspin of what does it mean to be a fantasy novel? Why am I so convinced that this is a fantasy novel at the point where there was no magic yet? And it did eventually show up, and so I felt, confirmed. But I was wondering what genre you would consider this book and why.
Oh, it's a great question. I do consider it fantasy, epic fantasy, as you know from reading it, and those who've read it, it's inspired largely in part by Plato's tale of the lost realm of Atlantis. And most experts would say that Atlantis never existed. That said, there's many people who believe it did. So I think that definitely straddles the realm of fantasy because you're not quite sure if it's just all made up. But as well, it is a fictionalized world. It's totally my crazy imagination that created my version of what Atlantis would be like. And it's funny, a lot of people categorize my book and read it as such and enjoy it as historical fiction. I think for that, you have to make a leap and make the presumption that Atlantis did exist in some form. And then you have to make the leap that, well, this is PL's version of something that really existed. And then from there, then you're saying, well, PL is making his account, his version of something that really existed. And that would make it historical fiction. Some people classify it as historical fantasy. So pretty well the same thing, except the fact that you add the fantastical elements. So, I mean, what I would categorize it, I do categorize it as epic fantasy, more on the military fantasy side. That comes up more, I think, in the books that follow A Drowned Kingdom. But yeah, pretty well epic fantasy. That's my take on it. But I talk about this a lot, that when you write a book, you have ownership and accountability for it. But once it's out in the wild, it is whatever you, Lily, or you, Sarah, think it is, right? It's not really mine anymore. It's all your impressions and your thought processes and everything's added in there and mixed together. And that's what the book is.
We also ultimately landed on epic fantasy.
Yes.
I agree with that completely. It was just, I had to philosophize because until this book, I would have told you the definition of fantasy is a book that has some kind of fantastical element to it. But, reading about the very grounded, like politics and economics of this world, I was like, this is just a real place that it doesn't exist. Why do I consider this fantasy? And I was right, it is, but I had to think about it.
Yeah, I wanted you to feel that way. I wanted you to feel like this was a real, tangible place that existed, millennia ago, in the dim, uncharted years where history could be interpreted as potentially something other than what we know, and that this place is now gone, and there is an element of tragedy there, although the place had a lot of issues. Like all empires, there's an element of tragedy that some of the beauty of it has vanished, never to be seen again. I wanted that to be kind of a lasting impression.
I do think that definitely there is a very strong sense of place in this book with the empire and all of that and all of the world building that you do. And as a reader, it was a little bit slow going into it because we're introduced to all of these concepts, right? And I don't mean that in a negative way, just that we get so much about the world and the society, right? And then at a certain point, things start happening really, really fast. And the pace picks up really dramatically. Was that the same experience when you were writing it? Like the first quarter, the first 50% took longer because you were building out the world and then everything went much faster? Or did it all kind of go at that same pace?
What's funny is writing it, I wrote the ending of the book first, and then I came back. I'm weird that way. You've interviewed lots of writers. We have these weird habits and traits. But for me, to be honest with you, the world building part, so the book is divided into three parts, as you know, predominantly world building is a lot of it's front loaded in the first part of the three. And that was the easy part to write because that's really, I mean, I'm not saying it's a skill or a strength, but if I have an element of my writing that I really enjoy, that I feel that I can do well, it's the world building, right? I've talked about some podcasts, like I never thought people would really think my ballad scenes were good, but people seem to really like them. But it's not something that I thought would be a strength. And this book doesn't have many, like the books to follow have lots. But the world building is the easy part. That's, creating the world because it's all in my crazy head, right? And, I have all my maps and my genealogical charts and, my timelines. And it's all just, it's just like you kind of spit it out. I don't want to say vomit it out because it sounds kind of more chaotic, but literally it just comes out. I think that because I'm a real plotter and the entire 7-book saga that I have is all planned out down to the titles of the books and the cover art and all of the plot lines, it really wasn't onerous on me to write any part of A Drowned Kingdom. It was the easiest book I've written to date. It just went zoop, that's the book. I know it sounds crazy, but whereas my second book was tough to write for different reasons. But anyways, yeah, it wasn't hard at all.
Was your second book the second book in this series?
Yes, my second book was second book in the series. And it was tough to write mostly because of things like imposter syndrome, more on that end, because, you feel that you're taking all the things that people liked or didn't like about the first book. You're looking at what nominal, marginal success you enjoy and said, okay, well, all the people are expecting the second book to be even better. So if you don't make it better, then, you haven't succeeded. So I felt that pressure, I think. And even though a lot of people love the second book more than the first book, the first book's my baby. That's my baby, right? I was just on another podcast talking with Ryan Kale about that. It just has a special place in your heart, right? And so this one that we're talking about does for me.
I feel like, and I'm not a writer at all, but I feel like the first book is for you, and then the second book and everything subsequent to that has expectations because you've put out that first book or the other books in the series into the world. And as you've said, like people are bringing their own viewpoints and their own perspectives to the series, and you have to balance that versus what you want to do and what you're like thinking of. And that just sounds a lot harder to me.
Yeah, it can be. Some things I really like to write about. I love to write, not a good, romance, relationships. I get to write more of that in later in the series. Sibling relationships, somewhat in this book, obviously, it's a big part, but parental relationships, things like that. I get to write about that later on in the series. But this book was very much, of course, as a first book, laying everything out.
So our main character and our point of view character, I'm gonna pronounce his name wrong again. Othrin, I think.
Authoring.
All right, great. Was fascinating to me because he was such a, well, say interesting guy to be kind to him.
Have to be kind. He's not a good guy.
No, he sucks and was very racist and terrible all around. But did you have any special considerations around writing a main character who's so deeply flawed?
Well, I wanted to write the things he was saying and his viewpoints and his things he was espousing as sensibly as I could, but as realistic and as forthright and blunt as I could. That's kind of a delicate balance, I guess. And I wanted to depict someone who was real, that you would think, I met someone like this and this is how they sound. But I wanted you to be able to look behind that and also see some of his positive qualities and see that why he was the way he was. Did he have any hope of change based on things like his upbringing, the people he's surrounding himself with now, and the people who have influenced his upbringing, the experiences he's going to encounter? So the things I considered most with him, though, was making him seem authentic. Of course, in the context I write, it's kind of analogous to like a medieval type period. So people don't have as long lives. They, 50, you're pretty old, and you do things more accelerated. You marry young, you have children younger, you take on responsibility younger, and he does. But so it's easy to forget that, as much as your life in terms of lived is shorter and some processes are accelerated, he's still nominally a pretty young guy, right? And there's an element of maturity there too. I want you to look at, is this realistic for someone who, based on his upbringing of privilege and royal and at the pinnacle of a society, who thought they're the pinnacle of every society, and everything else that went around him, and his rather dysfunctional family and all those things, was it realistic? What I really aimed for was realism. So if he seems realistic, then I did my job. That was the main consideration. I wanted to be realistic.
I definitely feel like you nailed that. And it was really interesting for me because like I'm not a huge grimdark reader. Like I don't like, or I tend not to enjoy stories where the main character and the world are so flawed and dark. Not that the world particularly was especially dark. I mean, not compared to grimdark, but Othrin certainly was. And yet I still found myself invested in his character journey. And I thought that was really, really well done.
Thank you. Well, I'm honored. Well, that means I did my job, because that's what my aim is. I want you to be invested in Authorin, invested to see, can he change, to what degree will he change, how we navigate all the myriad of problems that he's facing. Because I think the one thing that can get lost sometimes is, I'll say, what would you do if you were him, put in his position, in the situation he's in, dealing with the problems he has? They're not easy, right? And so I think you also gain a little bit of empathy for him in that what he's confronting is a lot. Realistically, he is confronted with a lot of challenges.
Absolutely. Can I assume that the whole series follows him as the main character, or does it jump around?
While the whole series follows him as the main character, you will see more POVs and different POVs as the series progresses. The Drunk King was strictly his POV. And when we get to the last Atlanteans, was his second book, you'll have a couple of chapters from, I won't spoil anything, from other characters in the book. And they're first person as well. And that continues in Northern King, the third book, where you also get an omnipotent third person perspective in the prologue. And then when you get into Alliance Pride, which is the fourth book, which is about to be published, you have a couple of POVs, third person, author in first person, and it just continues from there because there's a reason for that. Author is, of course, an unreliable narrator, and I don't want you as a reader to see certain things other than from his limited, flawed perspective until later in the series. So as things kind of are revealed, you'll be like, oh, that's what was going on with that, right? So that's a big reason for the first person POV.
You just answered my next question, just because Othran admits out loud that he wants to rewrite history. He intends to rewrite history, which makes me, as the reader, reading his perspective, go, well, now I can't trust anything you say. It was delightful. I felt like seen by the characters somehow.
Yeah, and I think that is also part of obviously one of the themes that history in all of its forms isn't always necessarily reliable because of the people who are writing it, and that Othran is certainly not the first leader, past or present, that chooses to rewrite narratives for their own benefit. We're faced with that even in modern times, right? So this is something so new and earth-shattering, simply presenting it from a first-person perspective where you're kind of forced to like, well, for now, all I have is his perspective and his claim that this is how things happen, right? But as the series progresses, you do see it's easier to delineate how much of what he's telling you is spot on gospel truth and how much is kind of Othran's, either embellishment or twisted, viewpoint.
Well, that makes me very excited to continue reading the series and to see how his viewpoint continues to be unreliable and in what ways it's unreliable. But one thing that he talks about a lot, and one of the main conflicts in this book, is this tension between the quote unquote pagans who worship multiple gods and the Atalanteans who worship the single god. And that's kind of a through line through the entire book. Can you talk about writing that tension a little bit?
Obviously, one of the themes in the book is appreciate for the other religions, religious persecution. Would it be considered appropriate for, one religion to subjugate another, to not only subjugate, but essentially eradicate another because they feel their religion is the better one, that they're doing it for the good of the religion? And this is how empires, colonial empires in particular, operate. Historically, all the great empires, that have ever existed, you can go back as far as human history exists. That's their blueprint. That's their playbook. So that's the Atalanteans' playbook. I wanted specifically with the way that Othran and the Atlanteans cast other religions as heathens and pagans, that, without perhaps examining their own religion very closely, because they take it as essentially, the only true religion. What happens when you grow up with that worldview and you've never really been exposed to other religions on an intimate level? What happens when some of that security and the safety and the foundation of that is ripped away a bit when you actually do come into contact with people who have other beliefs, and when they can rationalize those beliefs the way you rationalize your own, and when you meet intelligent, thoughtful people who can articulate why their religion matters and why it has credence and why yours might not? And he's never been challenged on that, right? It was a done deal. But as the book goes on, there is that clash. He thinks that he's going to come in and, as the Atlanteans have done, forcibly, if necessary, subjugate, and everyone will of course see the light in his religion. But when you come against people who they ain't having it, and they have their own, thank you very much, gods and goddesses and ways of doing things, and they have their own reasons for why they do, and they have their own, historical context going back hundreds or thousands of years, maybe even predating your own religion. Yeah, it was quite the eye opener. So I wanted the reader to see, how the potential for religious enlightenment could occur. Doesn't mean that it will, but how it could.
You're going to open the door for him, and whether he steps through or not, we don't know yet. I don't know yet.
Well said. Well said. Yes. And that if he does, it's a process, but he might not.
Well, we're going to be able to talk in a little bit more detail about things he may or may not do once we get to the spoiler section. But before we get there, I have a question for Sarah. Sarah, who should read this book?
You should read this book if you like political epic fantasy with extensive world building, and if you want a long series to sink your teeth into. The series isn't complete yet, but 3 books are out. The 4th book sounds like is coming out very soon, so you have a lot to read in the meantime.
The remainder of this episode contains spoilers. So I brought up at the very beginning how the magic system is sort of implied at first. Maybe that's not quite the right way to say it. The druids obviously are doing something. We don't really know what.
Although, I mean, yes, I think in hindsight they are doing something, but in the beginning, I will say that I kind of thought that it was just propaganda and they weren't actually doing something.
I was not convinced they were doing human sacrifices. That I was like, that's definitely made up.
I wasn't convinced they were doing any kind of magic at all.
Interesting.
Yeah, until we knew for sure that there was magic in the world.
I said implied.
Yeah.
Well, we do see more concrete magic later on. How much, can you give us a teaser, I guess, about how much of the magic system we've seen in this first book compared to what we have coming later in the series?
Okay, so first of all, I mentioned earlier about wanting to give the reader or refusing to give the reader anything other than Othrin's unreliable first person narrative. And the magic is a big part of that because, I mean, obviously, as a reader, you can read this book and go, is this all in Othrin's mind?
Yeah.
Is he imagining this? Is this really happening? Some of the phenomenon that happened, can that be explained rationally by non-magical means? Could that have happened? Talked about the Druids. Well, did they really do this? Did they do all these things, spirited people away? Did they engage in human sacrifice? Did they not? There's no real tangible hard evidence to it. I wanted the ambiguity. I wanted you as a reader to question what's really going on here. Okay. And I wanted you to have that feeling by the end of the book. Is there really magic in this book? Or is this all coincidence? Some things that happen? Is this all an author's sense? Is author going crazy? Is he lying to you? Like, I wanted that feeling of, we're not really quite sure what's going on here and how this all works yet. So the first book, I definitely wanted that feeling. As the series progresses, you get to learn slowly. I peel back layers, a layer here, a layer there, and you understand to what degree this is real and this could potentially be imagined or false in terms of what's going on. This could be simply run off to coincidence, but seems like it's definitely something going on here magically. But again, it's a progression. It's a 7-book series, and I don't reveal everything right away. It's something that, again, I peel back the layers. So by the time you get to around book 4, that's when things really start to kind of explode in terms of the magical element. But I do want you to have that feeling of, disorientation in terms of, I don't really know if I can trust that this is magic. That might be magic, but I don't know about this. Did this really happen the way he said? What is he really seeing? I wanted that feeling.
I personally was using Galthin as my compass in this book, which maybe was wrong because even Galthin's dialogue was told to me from Othrin's point of view. But that was really how I oriented myself, especially with the angelic visitor who told Othrin that he's the chosen one. I was like, that's convenient. But Galthin does say, hey, how did you learn this language overnight? And so to me, I was like, okay, that means something did happen. And that's all I can say about that, because I haven't read the second book yet.
Well, yeah, Glathan, Othrin's cousin, he's an interesting character in that he is probably one of the most benevolent, wise, kind, thoughtful, introspective, open-minded, considering he's raised in the same environment as Othrin, essentially. He's only kind of a rank below Othrin in the hierarchy. He's part of the royal family. But Glathan is more well-traveled. He's more cultured. He has been to Crimea previously, so he's encountered the cultures that Othrin is about to encounter. He knows much more about them than Othrin. He's had that exposure. He's also generally more tolerant. And there's reasons for that, which you'll learn later why. But Glathan is a good barometer in a lot of ways for the kind of grounded in reality, as you point out. Like Othrin uses Glathan as that. When Othrin is going off kilter, hold on to Glathan, what Glathan's saying, right? He believes in me. He knows what the right thing to do is. He's my moral compass. He's my advisor. So he is a good barometer in a lot of ways. If you'll remember, Glathan doesn't always necessarily comment about the veracity of something Othrin says, but he says that he believes in him, right? So there's a general overall endorsement rather than the specific thing that Othrin may be talking about. And as well, I think Glathan believes in Othrin despite Othrin's obvious flaws. So I think hopefully the readers, they ask themselves, why would someone as smart and kind and nice as Glathan just want to follow this dude, right? Who's this way, right? When Glathan himself seems a lot more fit. He's a lot more kingly. a lot more magisterial in his bearing. He's wiser, he's more mature, he's older. Like, Gladen should be the king, if anybody, right? So, but yet he's just bound on following Othrin. But again, those things are kind of explained as we go along in the series.
So you mentioned that you've had kind of a really clear vision for where you're going from the beginning of writing. How different is the final version of this book from the first draft?
It is, I would say, if I could align it in percentages, probably 75% the same. I think what's changed is you both are very experienced readers and you spoke to a lot of writers, except for that phenomenon of sometimes characters just take the hell over. They just grab you and go, sorry, I need more page time, and I'm taking it, and there's nothing you can do about it as a writer. And you're like, okay. I know that sounds really, really crazy, but it's a real phenomenon. So for example, Lacey, one of my favorite characters in the book, her role wasn't going to be as prominent as it ends up being throughout the whole series. She was more of a minor character, and she just said, nope. I need more page time. So, with the exception of that and a couple of more minor subplots, largely, the series is what I planned out and intended. Because, like I said, I'm probably a planner to the extreme. So, where we wind up after 7 books is overall pretty well exactly where I wanted us to get to. And hopefully, it's an interesting journey.
It's interesting that you say that Lacey was originally intended to be a minor character because I definitely got major character vibes from her.
Yes, she is a major, major character. She is, in a lot of ways, Othrin's foil. They're very similar, but yet very different. And she's one of the few characters in the book that can put Othrin in his place, call him out on the things he says and does, challenge him. And yet, of course, she has a real interest in him romantically, which, obviously you can imagine creates a lot of tension. Yeah, she kind of took over, and I love her character. I love writing. All her scenes are always my favorite to write, and I just find her to be really compelling and someone who, a lot of people say they can't get enough of Lacey in the books, and you'll see more of her as the books go on.
Well, good.
So we've talked a little bit about all of the world building that we've gotten in this first book. Is there an aspect that you think ends up being the most important later on that the reader might not realize?
Well, there's a few aspects. What I can say is this. Number one, I think a lot of people were surprised, although those who know, I mean, the tale of Atlantis is one of the most popular fables ever written. People know it sinks. I say right up front that it sinks on the back, or there's no spoiler that Atlantis sinks. But I think for some people, it was the extent to which I built up that world, my version of that world, and then essentially destroyed it. So that might have been a bit surprising that, we spent a lot of time, like learning about Atlantis and how the society worked, as you said, and the histories, genealogies, the customs and the different parts, the different regions, and then you destroy it. There's a few reasons for that. One, because there will be 2 prequel trilogies, which will explore Atlantis. You'll get to spend a lot more time in Atlantis, and those prequel trilogies will be grounded on characters that Othrin idolizes, but that lived long before he was born, that don't quite turn out to be the way he kind of thought they were.
Oh, that's the Purple Prince, and I want to say Acklin, and I know that's wrong.
Adelan, yes,
Yeah.
you nailed it. So the Purple Prince, whose name is Arklin,
Okay.
and Adelan, the first king of Atlantis, who Othrin idolizes. They're like his Taylor Swift, right?
Yeah.
So he thinks that they're the greatest warriors ever, the greatest lords ever, but they don't turn out to be the way he thought. Anyways, you will learn that in the prequels, all about them and why they're relevant to things that are happening in the series. So Atlantis itself, for all the world building that I create throughout the John Kingdom saga, the part about Atlantis itself that is only really for 1/3 of the book and gets wiped out, that's really the most important part.
So I'm guessing you didn't then sink all of your world building and genealogy notes in the bathtub after Atlantis sank. You weren't like ceremoniously drowning all of your notes and everything.
No, well, I mean, Acremia has a rich history, rich cultures, languages. You'll hear and learn a lot about Acremia as the series goes on, the new continent that they go to. But although I do give you a lot of history and genealogy, etc., with the new world, Acremia, the first third of the Drowned Kingdom, the first book, is the most important element of everything to come. And what I do, just I guess as an inside knowledge, I write very circular plots. So what has gone before will come again, and I do a lot of foreshadowing. So by the time you get to the second book, it's like, oh, that was foreshadowed. Third book, oh, that was foreshadowed. And so I think discerning readers will definitely see. And when they get to the end of the book, I hope people go, oh man, I should have figured that out because, that's where everything started. But I would mention there is another 7-book series planned subsequent to this series called the John King Saga that will wrap up the entire universe. So this 7-book series, 2 prequel trilogies, that is short of any buzz or short stories I write. We'll see if they get rid of it.
I love it. What's your publishing order plan? Is it first this 7-book series and then the prequels and then the final series? Or what's your plan? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Some book series first, and then I will take you back about 500 years to the beginnings and origins of Atalantics, and you'll get to meet the first king of Atalantics, but not told through his eyes, through the eyes of another character. And then you will get to meet the Purple Prince, which is another couple hundred years forward. And again, all these will tie into the 7-book series with author in the John King Saga that you're currently reading. And then there will be a final 7-book series to wrap everything up.
Awesome.
I'm excited because two of my favorite things are seeing how history or historical events have changed and become kind of legend in a world, and also going back to the beginning of a series once I've read through it and seeing all of the foreshadowing. So it sounds like I get both of those things with your books. So I'm very excited by that.
Thank you. I hope I succeeded meeting those expectations. I think I'm able to explore more elements and aspects of my writing, like narratives, multiple perspectives. The battle scenes really intensify. The romance gets dialed up. The heat death factor definitely gets dialed up as we progress, and that's not for everybody, but that's always something that I enjoy writing. I've always wanted to write romance, love, sex. Those are just parts of the human experience that I think make books realistic. I know it's not for everybody, especially fantasy readers. A lot of them aren't too fussy about that, but I like it. And human relationships, right? Relationships are at the core. I'm a character-driven writer, and I'm a character-driven reader. Characters are what I find interesting, the people.
How do you manage character growth versus consistency over a multi-book arc? Like, we've talked a little bit about how you have a definite plan for the series and how Othrin starts out as this very flawed character and has these opportunities to grow. But how do you manage that growth?
Well, I think, again, Sarah goes back to realism. So I would submit and argue, and of course, open to being challenged, that most people don't change overnight, and that most people don't change unless either drastic events happen in their life that compel them to change, or it is a long sustained kind of over a long life, such as quitting smoking may take you several 10, 15, 20 times. May take you 20 years until you finally actually quit. You will start and you may go cold turkey, and then that doesn't work and you smoke again. And then you try the patch, and then that works for a while, and eventually you find your method. But that may take years. And so I think, if I can use analogy, change is gradual. There are failures, like misfires, and you try to change, you have the best of intentions, it doesn't work. You slide back into your old habits or ways. Then something happens, you move, make some progression. You might take 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And it's that journey, right? And that, I guess, part of it is when you try to quantify change, how much did this person change over the course of this period? I think that's a really hard thing to nail down, right? But that's what I want to depict with Othrin. He's going to go through these periods. Some things he's just going to be so entrenched, because we're human, that's where we are, that he won't be able to change. He may be able to change this aspect, but not this aspect. Or he may be able to change all of them. You have to read on to see. But, that's what I want to depict. It goes back to the realism. So that's how I imagine. I try to make it realistic. Because some reason may say, I really want to see him change quickly and not be this horrible person. But I don't think that's not a realistic depiction of, I think, human nature and how people change. So
What about you? Has your favorite character in the series changed as you've been writing it?
So my 3 favorite characters in the series. One, I can't give away the spoiler as to this character's change evolution, but I can say that their change is more because of very, very extreme circumstances and them trying to influence other people a certain way because of this radical belief that they took on, but then finding that maybe everything they've done has been a bit too drastic and maybe finding a more balanced approach to change. And that's something they don't find until the end of the book. I can't really talk about the character too much. So now let's talk about Othrin, who is also a favorite character. So Othrin, his change, again, without giving away spoilers, is going to be tumultuous. And there will be times you will clearly say, oh, yeah, he's really progressed on this element. And there'll be times you're like, he ain't changed a damn bit. That'll be frustrating. There'll be moments of frustration with him, lots of them. But there'll be also moments where you might start to question, you know what? I kind of see where he's coming from. I don't agree with it, but I kind of see where he's coming from, what he's doing. So that will be interesting. And then when it comes to Lacey, who is probably my other favorite character that I'll talk about, her change of progression is very much like Othrin. She wants power. She knows how to get that power. She's playing a very long game. But Othrin is the fly in the ointment because of her love for him. And how will she be able to achieve what she wants and still get Othrin? It's going to become pretty clear that something's going to have to give there. So will she stay true to her ambitions, or is she going to stay true to her love for Othrin? And that's kind of like, going to be the push and pull there.
I don't know if it's coming, but I am waiting for a showdown between her and I've forgotten Othrin's wife's name. Elias? Something like that.
Oh, Alias?
Yeah.
Alias.
Thank you. Well, PL, before we let you go, what would you like readers to take away from this book?
A few things. One, in this book, women are represented because we're seeing Othrin's very flawed, misogynistic point of view. Women, other than women like Lacey, don't seem to have a lot of power. They don't seem to have a lot of agency. But I think you'll quickly realize as you progress in the book that the Drowned Kingdom saga is about women and their agency and their power. And you'll quickly see, especially by the time you get to book 3 and 4, just how powerful and just how much agency the women in this book have, and that they are actually the heart of everything that's going on. And number two, I would ask you to realize that, first of all, Othrin's views are certainly not my own. They're the antithesis of my own. And that although it may be frustrating, I believe that the book is worth reading and the series is worth reading to see Othrin's journey and to see what their journey tells us about ourselves as human beings and our capacity for change, why we should change, why it's important. And if through seeing his journey, can we solve some of the conundrums that his journey represents, i.e., colonialism, racism, homophobia, misogyny, religious intolerance? Are these things that can be solved, like by humankind? When we get to this utopian state where they don't exist anymore, are they always going to be with us? And how can someone who is a bigot, is there hope for them? What do you do with these people? Do you just write them off, leave them alone, isolate them, try and help them, fix them? What's to be done with them? And what do you do with them when there's someone who is in a position of power and influence, and that their decisions based on their views affect other people, affect whole, countries or continents or worlds even? And then finally, I wanted to express that I want to give you a feel of this is an epic kind of classical fantasy in a lot of ways. Yes, there's the author element about, but it harkens back to those old time classics that hopefully has some interesting political drama and some interesting battle scenes and a lot of human family drama and the journey of an anti-hero, kind of like the person who thinks he's the hero, but maybe he's the villain. We're always the hero of our own story, but I hope that people find that compelling.
I mean, and we haven't even talked about just to pick up on one tiny thing that you've said, we haven't even talked about the battle scenes, but they were very good.
And the sex scene we got a tiny bit of.
Yes.
Very tame compared to what's coming later.
Ooh, I'm excited. I know that faded to black and I was like, no.
Yeah, they're very tame to what's coming later. I think for some people, I think the fourth book is a bit of a shocker because there's quite a bit of that, quite a bit of romance, sex, love, and things. But anyways, yeah, it progresses, so intensifies.
Well, those things are part of life, so it makes sense that they're part of fiction too. And I know that some people don't like them, but I think that more books should include them.
And I love reading romance novels. So when you can stick romance in other novels, I'm like, yeah, fun.
I hope you enjoy, what's to come if you do continue with the series, because there will be a lot of romantic entanglements. So,
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to continuing the series. And talking about continuing the series, you said that book 4 is coming out soon. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Release date, when we can expect it?
well, thank you, Sarah. Don't have quite a firm release date yet. I always say with my books, the spring, I try to release a book every year, and I've been successful in doing that thus far in the series. So every spring, sometime between, end of February and beginning of May, I release a book. And then the fifth book, which is entitled A Pack of Wolves, I hope to be again out in the spring of 2025. And I won't give away the titles for the last two books, but expect them in the spring of 2026 and 2027, respectively. So, Alliance Pride, the fourth book, it's a game changer. It's kind of, I talked about all of those mysteries that you get in the beginning. You're wondering, you get a lot of answers, not to everything, but you get a lot of answers in Alliance Pride. And the battle scenes, you see some very big scale battle scenes in those books. And there's a lot of romance and a lot of political intrigue. And a lot of things come to a head in that book. A lot of things come to a head. And there's also some time jumps. So yeah, it's a lot to absorb. I think it's also the biggest book of the series. It's around 600 pages. That's the biggest book of the series. The rest are between 4 and 5. So the next book, A Pack of Wolves, be shorter, more like the 400-ish range. So more like a John Kingdom size. So yeah, it's a pretty big book. It is the middle book of the series.
Well, it sounds like it has something for everyone. Can you tell us where our listeners can find you on the internet so they can keep track of your releases and everything coming up?
My preferred handle is Twitter. It's at PO Stuart Writes. Also on Instagram and Facebook, however, less frequently. Still, the same handle at PO Stuart Writes. www.postore.com is my website where you can learn about the books and the releases. As well, I'm pretty active in the social media space with my wonderful co-host Taylor. Maybe between the pages, we have a podcast called Page Chewing, where we interview creatives and wonderful people from the community. And Lily and Sarah, you are two of those people where I'm hoping that you'd give us the honor of coming on in the future. You two are amazing. You're so wonderful. You're so supportive of everyone in the community. So we'd love to have you on Page Chewing at some point in the future.
Name the date and we're there.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to hold you that.
Yeah, I said it on the recording.
I am an assistant editor with Before We Go blog, led by the incredible Beth Tabler. So really, Before We Go blog crew, www.beforewegoblog.com, give me reviews. I also post them typically on Goodreads as well. So yeah, that's pretty well where you can find me.
Fantastic. Well, I've got some reading to catch up on before April, May, it sounds like. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a blast talking to you, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Maybe over on your side of things next time.
Oh, that would be absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Lee and Sarah, for having me. I'm extremely honored to be here, and hopefully you enjoyed the book, and hopefully you continue in the series and you enjoy the rest. So thank you so much for giving my work a chance.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon where you can support us and find our show notes and a lot of other nonsense.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated.
Bye!